As we've already heard, globalization can be looked at through many different lenses and have many different goals, including superdiversity. However, all this superdiversity comes at a cost, and this cost is what Thomas Hülen Derriksen calls the three crises of reproduction. In this course, we are primarily interested in the way in which local groups of individuals living in the Anthropocene deal with, adapt to, and coexist with these three crises of environment, economy, and autonomy. Additionally, we want to make sure to focus on the dual character of this globalization, how it both homogenizes individuals from vastly different backgrounds, while at the same time emphasizing difference that we, as a society, have come to call culture. Our group has decided to focus primarily on the role of commodification and tourism in this new dialectic, and how local communities around the world have come to find new and novel ways to reproduce in the modern era. We have decided to focus primarily on the Turayan culture group on Sulawesi Island in Indonesia.
Hanya untuk supaya ada kenang-kenangan, sebab mungkin 3 tahun yang akan datang sudah lain lagi bentuknya. Dan mudah-mudahan itu tetap awet seperti yang kita lihat pada saat ini. Kita ganti pakaiannya itu sebab pakaian yang lama kan sudah tidak bagus kelihatan. Mak nenek mengingatkan kita kembali untuk apa? Untuk menyatakan kasih kita kepada nenek moyang kita. Jadi mungkin waktu itu saya belum lahir, neneknya nenek saya atau nenek moyang saya sudah meninggal. Tapi di saat-saat nenek ini saya masih bisa menyatakan tanda terima kasih saya kepada nenek moyang saya. Sebab tidak mungkin saya ada kalau nenek moyang saya itu tidak ada.
They are mixed belief, yeah. The ancestors believe in worship to the soul of the dead body, even though they still believe in God.
Jadi bagi dunia ini mungkin sesuatu yang tidak lazim ya. Tetapi inilah adat istiadat kami, inilah keunikan kami di sini.
Facing crises of reproduction brought on by global pressures, they have adapted their cultural practices to fit the expectations of a larger global community. In other words, they have worked to fit their local knowledge within the framework of the hegemonic knowledge regime in the form of national and international norms. Turayan immigrants have built local support groups in cities around the world to finance and the continued cultural practice in the form of religious expression and funeral ceremony. And Turayans still living near the places their ancestors lived have adapted these ceremonies to fit the schedules of the tourists. In Edwin de Jong's work, Making a Living Between Crisis and Ceremony, he shows how Turayan history is a process of redefining place-based identity as a cultural-based identity, which allows for reproduction in the hegemonic knowledge framework. As Turayan society became disembedded from the local context, they have worked to re-embed themselves into an international world where cash is king. Turayan society was, and in many ways still is, seen as primitive. They somehow inhabit an earlier time than our modern era. As evidence for this, organizations like National Geographic focus on their continued ancestor worship and familiarity with the deceased. Modern society, after all, keeps a hygienic distance from their dead. It is taboo to interact with the deceased in any way. Even showing this on camera makes us uncomfortable. Yet, the Turaya live alongside us. They too live in the modern era. Sophie talked about superdiversity in London and about the process by which the global community has come together and flourished into a fractal milieu of languages, cultures, and customs. But how far will our modern society tolerate this type of reproduction? Would we feel comfortable living next to those whose life practices are so vastly different than our own? If our neighbor followed these ceremonial practices, if we were faced with this difference, this culture in our own community, could we actually coexist? In conclusion, we have talked about several important aspects of this new globalization trend. We've talked about the various ways in which we approach it as development scholars or as experts in communication. We have looked at globalization as a discourse, a process, an ideology, and more. We have seen how superdiversity, the diversification of diversity, or the culturalization of multiculturalism, has contributed to a flourishing of new ways to focus on the world, including new food and even new languages. And we have brought this to the local level with the Turayan people and shown how these individuals face global challenges. This phenomena is something each of us must adapt to. As we actualize our differences and define our own individual culture, we each face our own crises of reproduction. And it is only by learning from those on the fringes of our society that we can come to terms with the complex reality that is our modern globalized world. Thank you.